So welcome everybody. I'm Carolyn Streeter and I am a resident of Rutland, Massachusetts. I'm here to talk a little bit about the situation in Rutland with a cell tower that has been approved by the zoning board to be built between two neighborhoods in the center of Rutland, and also very close to the middle school in town and to one of our elementary schools, the K-2 elementary school. So this situation, I became aware of it a year and a half ago when I received a notice for a balloon test being done to, at the site of the cell tower. So that was a year and a half ago. Since then, I've been trying to spread awareness in town about what's going on, what the issues with cell towers are. I just learned myself through this process what the issues with the wireless radiation and the risks involved, what they are. And so I've been trying to share that education with my fellow residents here in Rutland. And but there were 9 months of public hearings with the zoning board, and then the tower was approved in August. Yeah, so now I do have the tower. I appealed that decision, and this appeal hearing will be at Worcester Superior Court coming up soon, May 18th. So that's what I'm looking at right now, and I'm still trying to raise awareness in Rutland about what's going on, particularly here in the center of town next to the middle school, but also in general with cell towers and wireless radiation. But I'm so happy to be talking today with Cece Doucette, and Cece is the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and she's a wealth of information about wireless risks. And what's really great is Cece knows a lot about how to use technology safely. So I do like to tell my fellow residents, I'm not anti-tech, but there are ways to use technology safely, and that we should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what, Carolyn, I really applaud everything that you guys have been doing there. And I know it might feel like you're alone in the community of Rutland, but I will tell you, this is going on all over the state, all over the country, and all over the world, because wireless has been pushed in upon us without, touting all the benefits, the convenience, but with no information to make informed decisions about how do we want to connect with technology. So as Carolyn said, the message is certainly not no technology, because here we are today and we're using safe, hardwired technology that allows us to have a far superior connection than anything wireless will ever give us. Not only that, our data and our privacy are far better protected going through a wire rather than going through the air. And same thing with speed and reliability. Wireless is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life. And even the president of Microsoft Canada, he's now retired, Frank Clegg, he submitted testimony for a bill in New Hampshire, and he said, wireless is no longer advanced technology. We should not be putting more wireless infrastructure into our communities. That just services the industry's need for more revenue streams for these additional services they want to sell us. What we should be doing is changing our local zoning bylaws and our state laws and our federal laws to ensure that the first preference is fiber optic technology or high-speed cable, which many people already have, right to the premises. And then everybody's got a router on the back. If you look at the back of your router, there are Ethernet ports. And this is how we always used to get our internet services. And like I said, it's so much faster. And who knew? You can simply choose to hardwire when you're not on the go. And this is a little Ethernet adapter that allows you to plug in, this one, for example, plugs in an iPhone. And then everything you wanted to do on the internet, you can safely do and get far superior service to anything this wireless technology is going to deliver. So the industry touts that there are Capacity issues. Well, the only reason there's capacity issues is they haven't told people that you get a better connection if you hook up indoors. And once you get people hooked up indoors, you don't need capacity for cell calls anymore, right? You simply use a landline hardwired computer. You can forward your cell phone calls to the landline. And I do 2 free public education webinars every month with New Hampshire for Safe Technology, because they are the first government in the country to actually pass a law to investigate this. And they came out with this incredible report. It's the top document in our country today that documents the corruption with the FCC, the wireless industry, and the FDA, and other captured federal agencies. There's a Harvard report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And ProPublica yesterday just came out with another article spotlighting how the FCC is protecting the industry and not Rutland and not my town of Ashland. So I'll go ahead. I've got a set of slides prepared because, you know, just like you've only been down the rabbit hole for 1.5 years. Most people have no idea. I had no idea. So I will make my slides available when we put the video out. People can click into the course description or the video description on YouTube, and they will have access to my slides. And there you will be able to drill down to every one of the facts that we're going to present to you now. So with that, I'm going to come in here, and in just a second, we'll be able to see my slides. Carolyn, can you see my slides now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is what it'll look like when we send it to you. And just quickly, I'll share with you how I got into this topic. So I'm a technical and professional writer by trade. And when my children were in Ashland Public Schools, which isn't very far from Rutland, they were students at the time that the wireless industry was pushing in their 21st century classroom campaign. And we kept hearing how the kids were going to need all this stuff to succeed in the world. So, you know, good doobie parent, I was running our local education foundation, and I ran campaign after campaign to get wireless infrastructure into the schools. iPads, Chromebooks, smartboards, minis, Apple TV, all these accoutrements we thought our kids were going to have. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer, she tipped us off that there were biological effects. And it was book group, so I just made a mental note of it. But not long after that, something else crossed my desk inferring the same harm. And I went, whoa, if there's anything to this, I'd like to know, because I personally brought this into Ashland Public Schools and every child in the district. So I thought, well, is there any science on this? And I was blown away when I actually took the time to look at the peer-reviewed, non-industry funded science, that there are literally thousands of studies showing biological effects. And as we'll see when we look at my slides on the science, children are especially vulnerable. So this, as you've detected in Rutland, is not an easy conversation to have, because our towns have only heard from industry and only heard the benefit of better service, what they consider better service, because that's what they're selling you. And they get a kickback for allowing these antennas to go up where they go up. And so the person in your community who's doing it on their private land, they're going to get a really nice revenue stream for doing that. So, you know, there's money at play here. Our schools have invested heavily in this because the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education got influenced by the industry, and they put it into their curriculum that they have to integrate this technology, whether the teachers want it or not. And it's tied to their evaluations at the state level. So this is not an easy conversation to have. But to our school's credit, when they did some research on this, we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in Ashland Public Schools, says, best practices for mobile devices. Turn these things off when you're not using them. Otherwise, we don't know any better, and we let them pulse microwave radiation at us 24/7. Turn the Wi-Fi on the actual access points and routers, only turn those on for the smallest amount of time you can get away with. And always keep these devices away from your body. So that was back in 2012. I had worked alongside Senate President Spilka. She's my legislator in Ashland. And we had run these campaigns to get all this technology in. So when I met her for office hours and I showed her the science, and I showed her Ashland's little sign, and I measured the radiation coming from her devices, it went right off the charts. And she's looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows. I said, is there something from where you sit that would at least give the public the right to know, just like we ultimately did with smoking and gambling and drugs and alcohol and pornography? Adults will make their choices around these items. But if we don't know the facts, how do we even know there's a choice to be made? So Karen Spilka put me with a lawyer in her office, and we whittled out a very simple bill that would bring people together at the state level, key decision makers, and let's just look at this and decide what to do. So we've had bills in Massachusetts for 10 years now, and New Hampshire is the first in the nation to actually pass a law to investigate. And we'll show you what New Hampshire found in a moment.
Right.
So on this crazy journey, I have had the privilege of meeting the world's leading experts in this topic, and they all want the same thing: amazing technology without hurting ourselves and our planet. And they're very accessible. And so I've collaborated, and we have created off-the-shelf training. We can train an entire community, an entire school, an entire workforce in about a half an hour online. And then it kicks out a handy tip sheet. And for workforce compliance, you get a certificate of completion to show you completed the training. So we have so many amazing resources today that we certainly didn't have 10 years ago when I fell down the rabbit hole. And because mainstream media today is owned by these environmental polluters, we don't get a balance of fact anymore through mainstream media. So it takes an education session like this to help people just say, wow, who knew, right? So we hope that you will, open up the slides when we make the video available to you. Click on any one of these links. And I tell people, don't take my word for any of this. Go know it for yourself. And if what we've put together can help you connect the dots quickly, then please launch off of this. But come back with a gazillion questions, because we know it's a lot to absorb. But the crux of it in Rutland is once those cell towers go up, it is nearly impossible to get them taken down at this point in time in history. So you better do everything in your power to stop that before it goes up. I know we are all exhausted. We've just come out of a pandemic. We're trying to find our new normal. People are trying to reconnect from social isolation. It's a very difficult time, but I am telling you, this is not something you want to say, oh, somebody else will take care of it. You need to be front and center, and you need to make your voices heard, or you are going to wind up with a cell tower in your neighborhood. And I'll tell you why that's a bad idea. So on this journey, I've also connected with a number of wonderful people around Massachusetts, and together we have formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. If you go out there, I have a web page for everything that's going on at the state level. I have a page for events, and you can register time and again to just come to these education sessions, because you'll learn about something, you'll get your head around it, and then you might want to take on the next thing. So come back a million times if you'd like. And we also have a news page, because the industry comes into our towns and says, oh, it's just the NIMBYs in your town, not in my backyard. But it's not. There are communities all over the Commonwealth grappling with this right now. So go out and look at the news page, and you'll see, man, this is happening all over. And this week, Great Barrington and Sheffield citizens did their due diligence. They signed a petition, they got a town meeting warrant article, and they have put a pause on installing any further build out of wireless applications until the FCC does its court-ordered mandate to bring the science in line with public policy, or public policy in line with the science. because they haven't updated their toxic public radiation exposure limit since 1996, when we did not have close range cell towers or this plethora of devices that we've been seduced into getting, thinking we're making life easier. I'll share more about why that's not a great idea. And then this is a really nice link to share with others who are dubious about this issue. Somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and saw that I had made these inroads with the schools and with the legislatures, and they said, we're doing a Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. Would you please co-chair the technology panel? And I thought, wow, you know, I do have a master's, but I'm not a terminally degreed PhD or MD. And they said, that's okay. We like the way you give information to people. So I said, okay. So we pulled together a panel. We had the retired president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg, talk about how his industry needs to step up and do better. We had Dr. Martin Paul, who tells us biologically exactly what this radiation is doing to our cell, and it's damaging. We had Theodora Scorado of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's biggest database and think tank on this topic. And they are one of the parties that sued the FCC and won. And we had Peter Sullivan. And I found Peter Sullivan's work somewhere on a lecture he gave, either to philanthropists or to the autism community. And my mind was blown, because Peter had been a fighter pilot like Top Gun, and he had very high levels of microwave radiation exposure from being up there, you know, in the Earth's highest electromagnetic fields, plus in a plane that had radar on it. That's what this is. This technology, wireless, was developed as radar for our military for weaponry. And then they commercialized it.
Yeah.
And then he had all the instrumentation inside the plane. So Peter got walloped with microwaves. And so he dropped too much weight. His teeth started getting very brittle, and he started having all these neurological issues. And then when his two sons, when each of them came into the preschool years, they both were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. And so Peter did what a lot of parents will do who are in that circumstance, and they will get all the toxic food out of the diet. They might do the heavy metal detox, because we know those metals settle in the brain and can cause, and other tissues, and can cause a lot of problems. And then he figured out the wireless radiation, and he did a digital detox for himself and his children. And today, Peter speaks in the autism community, and he says, first line of defense, do a digital detox, remove the wireless exposures. And Peter regained his health, and neither one of his sons are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was an option for anybody. Yeah. And we don't want to give false hopes. We know that there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's germline. It didn't come from dad's bloodline. It came from somewhere in the environment. So Peter's first line of defense now when he teaches is do the digital detox. And neither one of his sons are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I couldn't even believe it. But they're grown young men now. They both went to college. They're both leading productive lives. But when you put a cell tower up in a school or a residential area, you don't get a break. You are going to be pulsated with microwave radiation 24/7.
Right.
Right? So one of the gaps that we had when I first learned about this is so many people are getting misdiagnosed. So many people. And now we have an EMF medical conference. So what we're talking about today is wireless radiation. It is a pulsed, spiked, erratic electromagnetic field of radio frequency microwave radiation. And that is such a mouthful. Bottom line is we're spiking our organs with two-way microwave radiation that the science is showing is extraordinarily harmful. And now we have a medical conference with world-leading experts, the scientists, the doctors. I was honored to come in and speak on public policy. This is available only until the 15th of June for enrollment, and then completion has to be done by July 1st, and licensed healthcare practitioners can get 24.5 continuing professional medical education credits. They also did the second path for nurses, for CEs, and every one of our firefighters needs to have medical training, and they can do this from the firehouse. My fire station was psyched about this because they don't have a travel budget. So everybody should be telling our healthcare teams, please go get trained. And if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and at the end of my slides, we give you the email address and the website for that. On our resources page, it tells you, you can just print out the letter for this medical conference. I printed out, I brought it to my dentist, I brought it to my doctor, I gave it to my nurses, therapists, my physical therapist. Our whole healthcare team needs to know how to recognize, diagnose, treat, and most importantly, prevent these microwave sicknesses or electromagnetic sensitivities. So we have so many resources for you today, but the first step is to do what the Centers for Disease Control recommends. The CDC has already had a website for a long time that talks about radiation, and it says we need to address it in 3 ways. 1, spend as little time as you can being radiated, create as much distance as you can, and if you can't, then shield. But if someone puts a cell tower up next to your house, you might be able to shield some spaces, but you're going to be a prisoner in your own home because you're not going to be able to go out and enjoy your garden anymore, walking down the street. And I will tell you, the statistics are horrifying on the disability that comes from this, and that at least half the population is already electromagnetically sensitive, and they don't even know to connect the dots to their microwave exposures. And so we have some great bills this session, and I'll tell you a little bit about those in a minute too. So that's how I got involved. What helped my schools to become the first in the nation to even hang this little sign, I think, was when they saw the fine print that has been tucked into all of our devices all along. So for any of you listening, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take it out and go into settings, okay? And if you don't have an iPhone, you could go to this website called See the Fine Print, and it will tell you about a bunch of them. Like, for example, who knew that in the iPad manual, it talks about seizures and blackouts and eye strain. I know a child in Wayland, and I know a child in Sherborne, both of whom had their first seizures ever using the iPad. So this is real, and this is happening, and we need to come up to speed and take baby steps to learn and then start fixing it. So in an iPhone, you go into settings, and a little ways down, you hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but most people have been talked into upgrading their phones. So from general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. And it used to be nice to remember this little acronym to remember how to get back there, but it might still sort of work. So remember the G and the L, and you can say this gal taught me how to find this fine print. Once you're in legal and regulatory, about 4 down, you will see RF exposure. That's this radio frequency, man-made energy, as they call it, in this legal fine print. And the fine print tells us a couple of really important things. 1, this device was tested at a distance from the body. They put spacers in. So if you put your phone up to your head, like everybody does, or you tuck it into your bra or your shirt pocket or your suit pocket, or you put it in your yoga pants or your back pocket, you're exceeding the FCC's public radiation exposure limits, which, by the way, were never biologically safety tested. And they also go on to say in a subsequent paragraph, to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. So they're telling you, don't touch this thing because it's radiating.
Right.
Right? So use speakerphone or a headset. If you come back to one of my other webinars, we can teach you how to do that hardwiring. But for today, I want to give you an example of what this radiation looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment and we'll go back into it. And here in my house, after I stopped circling my tail, because it was a lot to learn, I was figuring it out completely on my own, but I'm the mom and it's my job. And I'm a human. It's my job to protect myself, right? So I, one by one, figured out how to hardwire everything in my home, forward cell phone calls to the landline. If you got rid of your landline, you might rethink that decision because you're probably already paying for that service still anyway. You just probably unplugged your phone. So this is the radio frequency radiation detection meter that was recommended at the medical conference. And now we have doctors purchasing these and putting them into their practice, loaning them out. There's a North Shore doctor here in Massachusetts who bought one and she loans it to her patients for $10. And she says, you've got 2 hours, go home, scan your home, do the scavenger hunt, find out where all these antennas are, jot it down, come back, and we're going to teach you how to remediate one by one by one.
That's
So you
super.
see, yeah. So you see how this one blinks and it's in the flashing green. That's where we want to be. That's as low as we can get it.
Okay.
So right now in my house, I have a reading of 2.5. The unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? There's ambient radiation because all my neighbors have Wi-Fi. We have 2 digital utility meters for solar and electric mounted on my home. They're not classically smart meters, but they're digital meters and they have an FCC ID number on them. And that's what tips us off that it's radiating. When I measured those, they were pulsating 17,000 times into my home every 24-hour period. So we were at 2.5. And because this is invisible, just like the pandemic, we now know we have to be vigilant about invisible toxins in our world. So let me give you a demonstration. My phone's always in airplane mode. I forward my calls to my landline. Everybody in my world knows to call me on my landline or shoot me an email because all that technology is safe because I hardwired my computer. But watch what happens as I take this out of airplane mode.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it starts doing the connections, trying to make a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. It's going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here. The Earth pulses these electromagnetic fields in a clean, healthy way at 7.83 times per second. That's a nice harmonious 7.83 that our body and organs are very much in need of that good energy. So I'm going to put this back in airplane mode because it makes my pinky finger tingle. That's my tell that it's messing with my blood. So we were at 2.5 microwatts per centimeter square on this Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. We went from 2.5 to 938,000. 938,000, and the science wants us to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, but 10 or less. And I will tell you, if they put a cell tower in my neighborhood, I am never going to get those clean readings again. So it is critical that the Rutland community tunes into the facts and looks beyond the industry disinformation because they've been at this game a lot longer and they are smooth at convincing us that we want those cell towers. So let me go back and share my slides again. And we'll start looking at the science in just a moment. But I also, as my slides come back up, you can see them now, Carolyn?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, my mind goes towards solutions. We made this problem, so surely we can fix it. And that's when I learned that there were detection meters to make the invisible visible. And so I became the first in the country to put one on loan in our public library. I went after a grant for our select board to approve Took me 3 grant cycles because I had to educate them before they were at a comfort level. And then our board of directors at the library had to sanction this to come into circulation. So I had to present and bring the facts. And that's only fair because we've only been taught what the industry has taught us. So I was so grateful that even though it took me 3 rounds of grant application, we ultimately became the first in the country to put one of these on loan. So now everybody in Ashland with the library card can take this out for a week or 2 and go home and measure in their cars, measure in their schools, measure in their offices, measure down at the playing fields, measure at the senior center. Wherever you spend time, you can gather that data. And then a doctor whom I met at a medical conference, she and I went after a cultural council grant from the state of Massachusetts. And we got funding for a library program plus the meter. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon put a cell tower up on top of this neighborhood. They broke through a dead-end neighborhood. Nobody had any idea what was going on. The town didn't know, the legislators didn't know. Turns out they had gotten approval in 2017 and never did anything about it. What they got approval for was a cell tower with an address at a commercial location on this giant parcel of land that's almost 60 acres. And so instead of putting the cell tower there, they let it lapse. And then they came back in 2019 and said, oh, we're ready to do this now. And the town said, oh no, we need to re-notify the community. And the industry said, oh no, you did once already. You don't need to do it again. So nobody was notified. And they didn't put it at the South Street address that was on the application. They drove 10 minutes around and went and cut through this residential neighborhood, and they put their cell tower up, and the citizens are going, what is going on?
Right.
The police even came and put up barrier tape. They broke through the police barrier tape, and they had the audacity to tell these families, children, you are the cost of doing business.
Ugh.
You are cumulative. They don't care.
Right.
They
Right.
don't care. So as much as they might be smiling at you in town municipal meetings, they do not care one whit about your health and safety. They care about their bottom line, and that is it. So I've been contacted from people all over the country that said, we love that pilot program. We're putting these in our library too. And it's not a stretch anymore today. Many of our libraries have a library of things. Like our town has a projector you can borrow. They have games and puzzles and a bike repair kit. And the energy industry, when they got rid of our healthier incandescent light bulbs and started replacing them with those swirly toxic CFL light bulbs, those throw off a lot of man-made bad energy. One of their campaigns was to put a kilowatt meter on loan in a nice little case in our library and promote the heck out of it so that we can take it home and say, gosh, look, I'm using this light bulb versus this light bulb, and look how much money I'm going to save. Common sense, right? But they didn't tell you that those light bulbs are toxic. So that's how I got the idea to even put a meter on loan in our public library. So maybe that's something that Rutland will consider doing, because you need to measure. And Carolyn, I think you have a meter. Is that right?
I don't have one, but my neighbor purchased one last year.
Okay, good. So there is one in the community, and people are usually very generous about giving their time. Most of them won't give you their meter because they probably use it all the time, but they might do you a favor. Or I know other communities where they all pitch in and just buy one, and they just share it when they're going to look for a new car or a new house, or
Right.
Internet of Things and 5G. They are putting radio frequency antennas in all of our appliances. They're putting them in, oh goodness, the iPotty, so you can put your tablet right there while you're toilet training your baby. I mean, they've got a little clip you can put on a baby's diaper with a radiation antenna in it, so you can know when your baby soils the diaper.
Wow.
I'm like, come on, pick up the child and do the sniff test like we all did. And where are you that you don't know your baby has soiled itself, right? I mean, we've gotten so disconnected with technology.
Yeah.
So this is a really good thing that a lot of towns are doing, is getting these meters so that we can measure and have safe technology. This public service announcement might be helpful in Rutland. My cable station came to the house. We did a walkthrough. I showed all these common exposures that we've trapped ourselves in these days, and then suggestions for remediation. So feel free to look at that if it might give you ideas for what you can do inside your house to have
Right.
tech. Okay. So let's take a few minutes and show what the science does tell us, the long-term effects. Now, mind you, every time a good study comes out, the industry gets a hold of it, and because they own mainstream media, they get to spin the messaging, and they will say, oh, that's just one study, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Or they will do their own studies, deliberately designed under conditions that would deliberately show no harm. But no harm is never going to be the same as safe. You have to prove it's safe.
Yeah.
So what do the long-term effects shake out to be? The U.S. National Toxicology Program is the gold standard for toxics research in our world today. This is the largest study they have ever done. They started 2 decades ago when cell phones were the technology of the day. And they did a $30 million study to find out if cell phones were safe. At the end of the day, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, which houses the NTP program, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign.
Right.
And so again, the industry says, oh, that's just one study. Well, right on the heels of our big cell phone study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large multi-million-dollar study. And guess what they found from cell towers? The same things we found from cell phones.
Okay.
And we know that that makes sense because back in 2011, the World Health Organization classified radiofrequency radiation as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. And that's in the same category as lead, DDT, thalidomide, engine exhaust, all these horrible things that we already know are very harmful. What was missing at the time were the animal studies back in 2011. Now that we have these animal studies done, the scientists who had been advisors to the World Health Organization are saying we need to reevaluate that group 2B. It should now be a group 1,
Right.
known human carcinogen. And that's what Rutland is proposing, putting in a neighborhood next to 2 of your schools that service the youngest, most underdeveloped citizens of your town. So we know we have the science. We don't need more science. So that's cancer. And that's what the industry has used as their endpoint for so long because it usually takes decades. But we know out in Ripon, California, where Sprint had a cell tower up on the school grounds, 4 children developed these really unusual cancers, brain cancers, spine cancers. Many teachers developed breast cancer. And when they polled the community, there were more than 100 cancers reported after that cell tower went up. DNA damage, that is the roadmap to grow a proper anything, whether it's you and I and a baby, or a pollinator, or a tree, or an animal. When you damage the DNA, you are changing the way that organism is going to develop and respond to the environment. So it was the infertility studies that actually got me on my feet. I started looking for the peer-reviewed independent science, getting away from the industry spin. And they have taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused apoptosis or programmed cell death. These damages were documented in 4 hours of exposure to these antennas from a laptop. And I had just sent my oldest daughter up to St. Mike's with her MacBook and her iPhone.
Yeah.
And my youngest just went into high school at the time, and we had bought her a laptop for Christmas. And where are both my girls using it, but right on top of their reproductive organs. So that is what spurred me on to find my voice on this and get my shaky little knees up under me and say, we have a problem here.
Mhm.
So, and Kaiser Permanente and others have come up with studies since that show that women who use wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates, right? And then for neurotoxicity, oh my gosh, when we were little kids, we didn't have this, right?
Right.
ADD, ADHD, Dr. Hugh Taylor, who runs the OBGYN medical program at Yale, has done these rodent studies because it's unethical to do them on humans. He's done the rodent studies where they expose the pregnant mice to radiofrequency. And he reports that those pups come out bouncing off the walls of the cage like not a care in the world, no focus, no concentration, much like we see in children with ADD, ADHD disorders. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She is a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know in the science of microwave radiation and what is happening to the families in her care. And we also know from Dr. Martin Paul, who has done the cumulative assessment of all the studies on Alzheimer's, that used to, like cancer, take decades before it reared its ugly head. So maybe we were starting to see people in their 70s and 80s with Alzheimer's. Then it began in the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, and today in some rare cases, we are getting 20-year-olds diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This is a neurotoxin. And again, the industry spun it for years saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified. Well, now we can tell you exactly how the cancers are formed, exactly how the sperm is damaged. And now we can tell you what's happening to the brain. We have something called the blood-brain barrier, which is a membrane that is meant to protect this sensitive organ. And what the science from Dr. Palpatcher and others is showing us is that this spiked pulse microwave radiation hitting us at millions and billions of cycles per second, that's megahertz is millions, gigahertz is billions of cycles per second. And remember, the Earth wants us to be at 7.83. We are getting overpowered, and those spikes are breaking the blood-brain barrier. So now you've permeated or opened up the blood-brain barrier with this radiation. And as the toxins from everyday cell repair are being escorted out through our bloodstream, they can get in there now and pollute the environment of the brain.
Right.
So we have done ourselves a big disservice. But once we know better, we can do better. And that's my hope, is that through these educational forums, we can all learn together. You know, when my kids were little and were upset about something, I would say, go scream into a pillow, get it out of your body, get it physically out of your body, and then come back to the kitchen table and let's sit down and figure out what we can do. So we're going to share a lot of really good solutions after we get through the science. As I mentioned, yeah.
I think it's interesting that on the scientific studies, because some people do say to me in town, oh no, I've looked at the science and I know that wireless radiation is not harmful to people.
Mhm.
But Dr. Kent Chamberlain, the electromagnetics professor at the University of New Hampshire, who was commissioned by the state of New Hampshire with other experts to look at all this science and determine if, well, they set out looking at 5G and ended up looking at 5G, 4G, and 3G, but the state convened him and these other experts, right, to look at 5G and determine if it's harmful to human health and or the environment, which they did determine after a year. But I did hear him say recently that the vast majority of these studies that he spent a year researching show evidence of harm. And he said 90% or better of these studies show evidence of harm. So there's a small minority of studies that show no harm for one reason or another, but it's the vast majority show harm.
It is. And that was one thing that he's had to reverse that message from industry, because they'll say, oh, they're just cherry picking studies, or these are fringe studies. And it's so wonderful that somebody like Dr. Chamberlain, who has published over the years with the IEEE, which is the Engineers Professional Society, he has very high standing in his field. Once he started looking at the science, he knows how to vet them. He went to the librarians at the University of New Hampshire and worked together with them to make sure that these were highly credible journals that they were looking at for their commission study. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Om Gandhi is another one of the experts, and he did this modeling. How far does the radiation penetrate our brain, say from a cell phone? These heads are tilted sideways, and the yellow dot is the ear. When you and I put an active cell phone up to our brain, it's putting microwaves into our brain about a third of the way through. On a 10-year-old child, it's about 2/3 of the way through, and on a 5-year-old child, that microwave radiation is penetrating that child's almost entire brain. And we know scientifically, children have a thinner skull, and they also have a higher water content in their brain. And we know what happens when you put food in a microwave radiation. It's the exacerbation of the water molecules that get things cooking in there. So we know scientifically that kids are especially vulnerable, and this is no good for you and I. So we morally have to protect our children, especially those children in the schools in the neighborhood where they're trying to put that cell tower up.
Right.
Right. So in the short term, many people after one of my talks come back to me and say, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear it. I love my technology. And yeah, right. They said, but when you started talking about the short-term microwave sickness symptoms, they recognized it. One or more of these symptoms. And then they come back and they say, you know, I took a chance and I did what you did, and I tried creating a sleep sanctuary, or at least a nighttime digital detox. And oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages, or my children's behavior issues have calmed way down. Who would ever know to connect the dots to all of this wireless pulsation inside of our homes? So who would know that back in 2002, the Americans with Disabilities Act recognized electromagnetic sensitivities as an environmental illness? So insomnia, here's what we know scientifically, why so many people don't sleep right. And I'll tell you, when we were kids, sleeping is what kids and teenagers did best.
Yeah.
So to have kids who aren't sleeping right today, something is desperately wrong. In the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, which operates off of daylight and darkness, in the wee hours of darkness, while we sleep, the brain releases melatonin from the pineal gland. Melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep, and it also helps to escort the toxins from the day out of the body through the bloodstream. What happens when we leave this invisible man-made energy light form pulsing all night, the brain thinks the lights are on. So it's not just the blue light from your screen that mainstream media has told us about that. It's the microwaves. It's a light energy form, and the brain thinks the lights are on. It can't distinguish between natural daylight and man-made light. So the brain thinks the lights are on, it's not releasing melatonin, and we are dysregulating our own body's systems to keep us healthy. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. So let me talk about those before I go into the skin. We now know of another mechanism of harm. It's called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I remember that because I used to love the candy Rolos before I had to stop eating junk food. Right? I know I
Yeah.
found out I had leaky gut syndrome at the same time that I
Oh.
figured out EMFs. It was just a joyride.
Oh boy, yeah.
But what the science tells us is just like that stack of Rolos, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and oxygenating all of our vital organs and systems, float around, bring oxygen. What the science is showing us that these electromagnetic fields are causing our red blood cells to clump up like a stack of coins or the Rolos. And then that clumping can't go anymore. It can't get through to bring that critical oxygen to all of our cells.
Wow.
And so that's what is called oxidative stress. And the medical community knows that oxidative stress is the foundation for so many chronic illnesses today. And Dr. Cindy Russell founded a really wonderful website called Physicians for Safe Technology. And Dr. Russell says we are basically rusting ourselves from the inside out with oxidative stress, and it makes sense. You get metal wet and it oxidates and it causes rust, and we get microwaves and we lose the ability to oxygenate our systems and we get rusty from the inside. So that's another mechanism of harm, is that oxidative stress and the rouleau effect. And then these skin abnormalities. People tell me about the hot ear that they get when they're on the phone.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, my pinky finger tingles if I hold something that's radiating. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin to help us navigate safely throughout our world. And the science is showing that this is sending those antennas into hypergear, and people are getting rashes, flushing. There's a gentleman in Framingham whose leg was going jiggity with the nerves, and doctors couldn't figure it out. Paid specialists, their tests came up empty. So Chuck started doing his research and came upon microwave radiation symptoms and that it can do nerve damage. And lo and behold, guess where Chuck carried his cell phone all the time?
Yeah.
Right in that pants pocket. Removed the cell phone. In his case, he was fortunate. The damage was able to be reversed, and then he just hardwired in his entire house.
Wow.
Yeah, so skin abnormalities. Our heart is an electrical organ. Our cells whisper to each other, sending electrical impulses all day and night. What happens when you overpower them with microwaves? It could cause your heart to go too fast or too slow, arrhythmias, depending on what your own biological proclivity is, right?
Right.
Cognitive impairment's a big one. We know as we age, we begin to have a little bit of cognitive decline, but now people of all ages can't remember what they thought they should know, right? It's a neurotoxin. And then at the medical conference, this was really upsetting to hear that, even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety, depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation before the pandemic among children and adults like we have never, ever seen before. And they were saying if we don't stop radiating the brain, it is changing biologically the gray matter and the white matter of the brain. And if we don't stop this, we can well expect many more of these societal outbursts like we've seen with these mass shootings and other anger outbursts in our society. So that's all the bad news for you and I. And it's not just you and I, every biological cell. And I know Carolyn, you're a scientist and you work in the field of biology. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Mm-hmm. But we know we have study upon study upon study that shows what this does to our wildlife, our pollinators. With 5G, it's bad enough we've got these longer wavelengths and frequencies that are carrying our signal for 4G. Now, the last thing to monetize at the end of the electromagnetic spectrum are these tiny little millimeter waves. And what they're doing is they pitch this to us as super highways and smart cities and faster streaming downloads. Well, first, they're buying up the entertainment industry as they push their new product lines on you. But these poor pollinators are about the same size as these millimeter waves. And not only can it overpower them outright and destroy them, it's also disrupting this symbiotic relationship that they have with the earth. So they have, pollinators, bees have like magnetite and other mechanisms in their, biology in their beaks or whatever, allow them to navigate using the Earth's electromagnetic field to get back to the hive, to get back to their nests. And what did we do? We introduced this giant layer of electrosmog. So it's not just the neonicotinoids, which of course we have to address the chemicals, but the science is showing that this is a huge impact on our pollinators. And I'll give you a life example. Out in Pittsfield, where that Verizon cell tower went up, one gentleman in the community was testifying with their municipality, and he got up and he said, I love my garden. I've been gardening here for 22 years. The first summer that cell tower went up, we had almost no pollinators. By the second summer that tower's been radiating, we had no pollinators, and he had to go out and hand pollinate his garden. So you don't want a cell tower anywhere near your home or your schools. And then there's a whole nother lineup of energy consumption. A Greenpeace analyst in 2012 said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was a decade ago. And look what they put upon us in that last decade.
Yeah.
So if we're ever going to get ahead of energy, we have got to make this a primary factor. So there's all sorts of things that go on and all sorts of choices we can do with our own devices to reduce energy consumption. Hardwire. And again, it's not rocket science. When you're not on the go, plug it in, get an adapter and turn off all of those radiating antennas. And then you have to measure, because you never know if there's another sneaky little antenna in there. So all this stuff here is using energy all the time, and we have never been taught to think about that. Why don't we know? That was my million-dollar question. I kept thinking, if this is as bad as little me can find in the scientific literature, surely somebody's got our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible expose report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And look what they chose for their graphic. It's a revolving door to symbolize that our FCC commissioners are from industry, and they are not protecting public interests. They are protecting corporate interests. And ProPublica came out with a really good, so this was 2015. Last November, ProPublica came out with this article, pretty much saying the same thing, but bringing it even more current. And then just this week, ProPublica came out with another one of these articles. So it is starting to get out there. We won't see it in mainstream media because they own the media. But these other really highly credible organizations like Harvard and ProPublica are reporting on this. And remember that $30 million study that our National Toxicology Program found DNA damage, cancers? That was supposed to trigger public policy. And instead, this was commissioned by the FDA 20 years ago, but those guys are long gone.
Yeah.
Now the gentleman who's heading up the FDA is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. Well, after that study, clear evidence of harm, he goes over to the FCC and says, oh, you can close that file. There was a file open, a docket 1388, where thousands of pages of scientific evidence of harm were put in there by scientists and doctors and citizens. The FDA said, oh, FCC, don't worry, keep doing what you're doing. And one might ask, why would Dr. Shuren of the FDA do that? Well, when we go and we look a little bit at who he is, we quickly discover that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm. that represents the wireless industry and all the other big environmental polluters. So he should have never been allowed to be near that NTP study. He had a clear conflict of interest, but this is the state of our federal agencies today. And sadly, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. Time and again, people shoot me a link that says the World Health Organization says basically nothing here to look at.
Yeah.
That was from 2016 because they buried the link to show that they've reopened their investigation right now. Cancers, infertility, electromagnetic sensitivities, the impact on the environment, the impact on children, the impact on infertility is all in their docket to investigate, but you won't find it because they bury it, right? Same conflicted interests run the internet in many cases, that run mainstream media, that run the industries, and that run ripshod all over our towns. Right. So, but we can provide you with those credible links because again, don't take our word on it, but we've done the legwork and we can help you connect the dots very quickly.
Super.
So that's all the bad news, you guys. Here's a diagram of personally what you can do to start taking these baby steps to create safer habits, to have amazing, far superior technology than anything you'll get through a wireless connection. You're going to have to rethink convenience, maybe talk yourself into a mind shift, but literally the back of your router has Ethernet ports. Plug it in to a cable. Most of us have more than one device these days, so you just get a simple Ethernet switch. It's like an extension cord for electronics. And then you just get little cables and plug in however many devices you have. In a classroom, you can get a switch that has 28 or 30 ports on it. It's not rocket science to fix. And then just get the adapters as needed, plug it in. And then I forward cell phone calls to my landline when I'm not on the go, because why would I want to pick up a radiating device when I can have a safe connection from a landline? So step one, simple, inexpensive. It's not going to break the bank for most of us. Hardwire. Step two, you have to go into every device and turn it off today. I should think that once this gets a little better known, our engineers are going to be like, hey, I can just make this so as soon as you plug in that Ethernet cable, it's automatically going to disable all those antennas. The industry just hasn't been required to do that yet. Step three, you really have to measure, because my daughter came home during college and she used to teach swim lessons in my backyard and she was in a hurry and she said, Mom, can I just turn on the wireless antenna for a minute? I just need to print out my swim schedule. I said, sure, sweetie, go ahead. Make sure you just turn it right off. The next work day, I'm sitting here and I eat a clean organic diet. I've cleaned up the radiation in my sleeping area, especially. And it just felt like the earth was sucking me down again. And that's how I used to feel under fluorescent lights, another man-made dirty electricity form of energy. And I'm like, what is going on? So fortunately, I had the meter and I turned it on and it was my printer. And she had done what I asked her to do, because the little faceplate with the little logo symbol was not glowing, but it was sending my radiation meter off the charts. And I'm like, what is up with that? I just went online and looked for my manual, and there were 3 antennas in there. Only one of them controls that faceplate glow. And I just had to go into settings where they told me and go off, let it dissipate. And then I measured again and had literally radio silence. So with 5G and the Internet of Things, they want to put these antennas in every product you buy, so they can harvest your data and sell it as a revenue stream. And that's a big privacy issue too. So hardwire, turn things off, and then measure. So you can do this, you guys. I know it's a lot, but you can do this. But what about the things we may or may not have control over? Those utility smart meters, you can look at this page on your own time, but the industry has talked our towns into getting rid of the really good old analog meters that had no biological risk to us. They've replaced them with digital meters. And like I said, if there's an FCC ID number on your meter, that's your clue that it's pulsing this invisible radiation. Lots of problems with these things, okay? But again, you know, we're here to teach. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife's a doctor. Both of them got violently ill in a short amount of time. They traced it back to this bank of smart meters that went on their condo. Jeremy's got a great TED Talk. Dr. Alexia McKnight is actually, ironically, a radiologist. She's a veterinary radiologist. And she got all these whole constellation of crazy symptoms to the point where she couldn't remember in traffic if a green light meant go or stop.
Yeah.
She brought me in, and together we did a professional development day in her school. So I'm happy to come to Rutland and do a professional development day talk too. We did 4 talks on their health and wellness day. And she gives her TED Talk here to talk about what happened when the smart meter went on her home. So, and then here we are at our friends, the cell towers. As we've reinforced, it's critical to look at the non-industry funded science because we know there's spin out there from industry. So I got way in over my head on this issue as I was investigating, and then I couldn't remember where to find these credible resources I had seen. So being a tech writer, I just created a very simple research repository of my own called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So I thought this will help me keep things straight. And if anybody else wants to use it as a launch point into their own investigation, you can access it right from Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resources page.
Okay.
So this is what the science is telling us. The minimum distance for a cell tower should be 500 meters. That's 1,640 feet. And Carolyn, I think you said your schools are within just a few hundred feet of this.
Right. The middle school is 500 and something feet, the middle school building from the tower. And the K-2 school is about 1,000 feet. That's the building off the approved tower location. Yeah.
And these should be from the property line, at least, because the reason why, and we have slides included in here from Dr. Kent Chamberlain, and he explains the science that there's a death curve and a neurotoxicity curve and other harm that happens inside this 500 meters, and it starts coming down at that 500 meter mark, and it doesn't actually catch up to the general population till double that, like 3,000 feet. Yeah. So we have no business putting cell towers in at close range. So anybody who wants to, anywhere in the US, can go to antennasearch.com, put in any address, and it will tell you, for the most part, where these big cell antennas and cell towers are. Okay, so we've got our personal devices, we've got smart meters, we've got big cell towers and macro antennas. And then the other exposure is these small cells. And what the industry is doing is trying to push in more of the big cell towers and antennas to be the backbone for all these small cells. And then once they have the capacity, they're going to start putting cell towers at the curb right outside people's homes, and they've already begun. So 5G simply means 5th generation technology. And here's what they're promising us, and they're buying the entertainment industry for a new revenue stream. 5G does not replace the longer wavelengths. It adds on a whole new layer of toxicity and electrosmog. All right. And again, their solution is we need more capacity. So we're going to put up more cell towers, and we're going to put them in your neighborhood every 2 to 12 houses. And as Carolyn, who's a biologist, will tell us, it's a raw deal for the trees, because these tiny little millimeter waves that they use for 5G get disrupted very easily by rain and snow and leaves and anything in their path, which is why they want to densify the towers so close together. And we get report after report of these guys coming literally in the cover of night and just lopping off the trees, which is so bad for the benefits that those trees bring for our environment, from cooling our towns to oxygenating our towns. You know, it's unconscionable what this industry is doing. And the kicker, well, one of the kickers, Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut had 2 industry leaders at a congressional hearing for the Commerce Committee in DC and said to them, so please share with us, how much have you invested in safety testing before you brought this to market? And they hemmed and hawed and ultimately were found to say, we don't know of any science that was done. So Senator Blumenthal said, as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And they've let this come to market. And then Computer World and others are reporting 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us faster speeds than what we already have with 4G. So why do we need this other layer except to pad the pockets of industry?
Right.
And here it is, January of 2022, Verizon put out their press release, woohoo! We're bringing 5G to 100 million users out there. Okay, so there's a lot more you can look at. There's a project if you want to use or purchase one of these meters. You can be a citizen scientist, take measurements in your community using the protocols by Dr. Magda Havas, and then enter them into her database. And she calls this her brag project. Can you brag about your town? B stands for these blackout areas where the pollution is so toxic. Red is not too much better. Amber is we're getting into trouble. And green is 1,000 or less. So we talked about indoors, where we want to create a safe living and sleeping environment. We want to be at 10 or less on these meters. Outdoors, the scientists say, provided you're on the go and you're not right under a transmitting tower, then we could probably do all right with 1,000. But we may need to reevaluate that now that the science has evolved. But that's if you're on the go. That's a whole different ballgame if you're stuck under one indefinitely. So what do some of the outdoor measurements look like? Up in New Hampshire, one of the citizens measured at their fire department. They didn't have a cell tower. In the green at 417. In Keene, New Hampshire, going down the main road, getting into a little bit of trouble. And I'm actually presenting on Monday in Keene, New Hampshire, because they have approved applications to put a cell tower at the curb inside this neighborhood right in downtown Keene. And actually, Keene did some really good work. While the New Hampshire Commission was investigating, we helped to educate them, and they put a moratorium on any further build out until the commission completed their report. Well, what I understand happened is one of the industry people from the Cellular Telephone Industry Association, that's rebranded to call themselves CTIA, the Wireless Association, they got in the ear of the authorities in Keene, and the mayor made his city council do a revote. 8-7, they reversed that temporary moratorium and started approving applications for small cells. So the politics run dirty and deep in many towns, or they're just scared and they think they're going to get sued. That's what the industry tells them.
Right.
But if you get your zoning code up to date, you don't have to be afraid, because what happens is the attorneys in the town who are not experts in telecom law, very few are, they say, wow, they say they're going to sue us. So they go and look where the attorneys look and say, oh my gosh, look at these lawsuits that they did. And they go, oh my gosh, we better approve these things. What they don't see is all the towns that have updated their zoning code with all these amazing protections that are allowed under the law. Those never go to court. The industry threatens, but the towns say, yeah, try it. We know what we're doing. And then the industry just moves along to a different town. So they don't see all these incredible things. All they do is they get scared and they cave.
Right.
Or they say, we want the money, and they approve these applications. Or they say, oh, you have to have heat to have harm from the device, because that's what the industry tells them. Or they say it's all within the FCC guidelines, so it's fine, because that's what the industry tells them. So it all comes down to education and getting our zoning code up to speed. Concord, New Hampshire. The woman in New Hampshire is Deb Hodgson, who got her legislature moving on this. Deb and I went and did the protocol, and took readings in the state capitol during the pandemic. So there weren't even many cars driving by with their radiating devices and vehicles. There were very few people on the streets, and we were already in the red zone at 66,000.
Wow.
Stratham, New Hampshire, where they put up a cell tower in the main road, already in the black zone. And then look at the blackout in the North End in Boston. This is Hanover Street, where we know we have all of our lovely Italian restaurants and bakeries. We also have residents living on top. See this pretty looking lamppost? Those two lobes, that is a cell tower.
Yeah.
And they sweet talked their way in by saying, we'll make it pretty. So they did that on the main drag. But when you go to the crossroads and you look down, you see these ugly gray monopoles stuck right outside people's bedroom windows. Literally a cell tower right outside their bedroom window. That's what 5G is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's always hope. And we looked to Martin Luther King Jr. for inspiration. And he tells us that when we finally make these important changes in our society, it comes through three channels. One, the public becomes informed. They care about it. They take the time out of their already crazy busy lives in a crazy busy time in our world. And they look at it and say, you mean to tell me that if I don't stop it now, I may never get it taken down once it's in here? And we should also tell you that it lowers property values. There are real estate studies done that say it can decrease your property value by 10 to 20% because people don't want a cell tower within 750 meters of their home. So that's even more than the health circumference around this.
Yeah.
So the public starts informing themselves, taking actions to protect themselves, then protect their communities. It goes through the courts and public policy is enacted. And I'll go through and just share some highlights. Again, the FCC was sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of scientific evidence. The ruling came out, ironically, on Friday, the 13th of August in 2021. And the court said, you didn't do your homework. You need to account for the biological impact to the environment, to children, to infertility, and environmental sensitivity and the elderly. You know, you just got to do your job because not one of our federal agencies has ever done the peer-reviewed scientific literature assessment. Not one. CDC and EPA were doing good work until the Telecom Act got passed in 1996, written by industry, and then their programs were defunded. Okay, so there are all sorts of lawsuits happening. Out in Pittsfield, there are some really groundbreaking things happening. So 17 children and adults have gotten so sick and their pets were throwing up right alongside the kids that they've had to abandon their house. And it took a really long time to work with their municipality. But ultimately, their city council said, Board of Health, do your investigation. Board of Health spent 15 months speaking to the doctors who gave the diagnosis of electromagnetic illness, speaking to the world-leading scientists, to the engineers, and to the industry. And at the end of the day, the Board of Health, fortunately, is chaired by a woman named Bobby Orsi, who's a registered nurse. She had fought PCBs from General Electric in Pittsfield a decade ago. So she knows the corporate playbook when she sees it. But they also wanted to hear from industry, and industry brought in this guy called Dr. Eric Swanson from Pittsburgh. And he's a PhD and a physicist. So people are impressed with that. But they did their due diligence. And he's up there telling them, oh, it's microwave radiation's fine. There's no science. It doesn't harm anybody. And it's all well within the FCC limits. So everyone's good. People are psychosomatic. It's the NIMBYs. They don't want it in their backyard, right? So Bobby Orsi and her Board of Health went and looked this guy up. He has never published one single paper on radio frequency microwave radiation and the biological effects. Mm-hmm. Not one. He specializes in quarks and other areas of interest in physics. So they documented this 24-page document, which I know, Carolyn, you found it to be extremely useful because it's so succinct and it's
Right.
very well sourced with all the science and they said, Verizon, this is an emergency order. You need to come to the table within 7 days and tell us why we shouldn't issue a cease and desist order. And there's actually a community member who said, I have commercial land, just move your cell tower here. I don't care. There's no residential around here. So they have solutions. Verizon did not come to the table. At the 11th hour, they went to the courts and put an injunction against the Pittsfield Board of Health saying, well, we think we're protected by this Telecom Act. So the Board of Health had already done their homework. They had gone to their state level authorities and determined that what they think the truth of this is that Telecom Act only applies to the application process for siting this toxic infrastructure. After it goes up in the community, if there's a nuisance or if there's harm to the environment and the public, it is their legal obligation to fix it. So they checked to see what it would cost to take this to court. There was 1 or 2 pathways they could go that all totaled up only in the 80,000s. And for a town, that's really not much from their emergency reserves, right? And so when this injunction happened, Mayor Linda Tyre, City Solicitor Pagnotta, and the City Council said, no, we're not going to give you that money. And so the Board of Health was coerced to withdraw their emergency order. So when that happened, the citizens who are not backing down, they are not going away. They now are suing the town of Pittsfield. So for Rutland's public servants who have only heard from industry and they're scared they're going to get sued, guess what? You're going to get sued anyway. You may as well get on the right side of this, do your investigation, look at these facts, strengthen your zoning bylaws, and reverse that approval because it doesn't look like it was legally done anyway, according to the lawsuit that you filed. So towns all over the country are going, oh, sugar, you mean the industry is going to sue us and the citizens are going to sue us? And it's happening all over the country. Yeah. So get your zoning bylaws up to speed and we will give you resources on how to do that.
Right.
And we're waiting for the court to come back. They had the hearing on April 6th and we're waiting to see what happens there. But for the first time, the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards wrote an amicus brief or a friend of the court letter in favor of the citizens. So to have the state level Board of Health Association send in a letter in support of the sickened citizens, that speaks volumes. And courts usually do not overrule a Board of Health. Okay, so we'll see, but there are so many lawsuits that you can look at. And then, as you said, we got this bill passed in New Hampshire. We've had bills in Massachusetts for 10 years. Right. We got this bill through the House, the Senate, and under Governor Sununu's pen in 7 months to form a commission. But your town should also know that for years, Swiss Re, Lloyd's of London, AM Best, they have recognized this as a world-leading risk, and they put it in their annual reports. And they do not cover for damages from electromagnetic fields of radio frequency radiation. So guess what, Rutland? Who's going to be left holding the bag when these lawsuits start? So one of the recommendations is to make sure that when you do your zoning code, you make sure you've got bulletproof insurance clauses in there, and we can give you language for that. So New Hampshire asked, why does that legal fine print even exist, telling us to keep it away? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies? And why are they only still talking about heat effects when the science is showing non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level biological harm? And why does the FCC allow 100 times more radiation than other countries who started invoking the precautionary principle? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? We should go through the Rutland schools and take measurements of what it is right now. And it's going to be bad. And then what's going to happen when you have a close range cell tower adding to that cumulative microwave radiation? I was at a conference one time, and I was talking to a woman who said she was a select board member in her town. And I taught her all about microwave symptoms. And she goes, I am also a school nurse. And she said, you just described everything that I now deal with every single day from the children and the adults in my building.
Wow.
So it is happening. Ask any teacher who's been around a while, how many tissue boxes did you used to go through in a school year? How many tissue boxes do you go through today for nosebleeds, vomiting, runny noses? It's happening, and we now know why, and we have got to address it. So as we said, we got testimony in, they reported this bill out, form a commission, investigate, and report back. And here's Dr. Chamberlain. He did, I think this one's a 20-minute presentation on what this bill accomplished and why, and what the science is, and you can look at his slides as well. That's him here, nicest guy in the world. So that report came out in the fall, in November 1st of 2021, which was too late to start taking their 15 recommendations to transition away from wireless, hardwire to and through the premises, and get our federal and state agencies to fix this. It was too late in their legislative process to introduce a new bill to start affecting those changes in 2021. So in 2022, they took on the first thing, which applies to Rutland. You need a setback based on science, not the FCC. And here's where Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada testified that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life. It should be secondary connectivity, responsibly placed far away.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
we have all of this, and they're still trying to work through bills. This one, the industry got into many of our states and changed the state laws to strip local control. So there's a bill this session that would restore that local control and put provisions in that would strengthen zoning code. In Maine, there is a woman who's a nurse and a state rep, Tracy Quint, and her adult children and her constituents were starting to talk up the wireless industry with her. So she just introduced a bill to form a commission now to investigate the impact on birds, bees, insects, and children. Connecticut has one to address these small cells and the smart meters that are making people sick. And here are the bills that we have. We started with the commission bill. New Hampshire emulated us. They actually got it done. We're hoping this session will get there. Protect kids from handheld devices, protect our schools. This was a bill that was modeled after my town's little sign here in Ashland to get the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to do something about this. And I've met with them and they say we're waiting for higher authorities to tell us what to do. So we have got to use our voices to contact our legislators and say, please co-sponsor these bills and get them passed, because everybody's waiting for them to give the high sign. We now have an emergency preamble on those smart meter bill, on the smart meter bill, because Eversource, National Grid, and others are saying the fleet that's out there currently is about to run out of its useful life, and we want to replace everything with a smart meter, which is wrong on so many levels, But a lot of those digital meters are already pulsing microwave radiation, so we at least have to have a no-fee opt-out, and that's what this bill is asking for.
Okay.
We now have a civil rights bill because people who become ill from anything that causes a disability we need to codify. We have some really good laws in Massachusetts, but this piece is missing. We need to codify that people with disabilities, as defined by Americans with Disabilities Act, to say you don't even have to have a doctor's diagnosis, but if this is compromising one or more of your abilities to function in your life, then that is a disability. And so people need to have the right, the civil right, to ask for accommodations when they go out into society. And then this bill is actually up for public hearing tomorrow. Okay, so I need to update this. These are Senate dockets and House docket numbers. That's how they first enter the system. And then when they're given the nod to proceed as grown-up bills, then they are assigned a different number. So before I send my slides out, I'll update this.
Okay.
But this bill is coming up for public hearing tomorrow. Right now, Massachusetts tracks 90 diseases, including Lyme disease. And with wireless, that's kind of where we are, where Lyme disease was like a dozen years ago. People were getting sick. Their doctors didn't know. They'd never been trained. They're telling them it's psychosomatic. That's where we are with many doctors today. And so we need to start tracking this. So if somebody, like all these people in Pittsfield, gets sick, they can tell their town, and their town can then put it into the MAVEN database, the Massachusetts tracking database. And then once we have good data, we can start making better decisions around health. And the bill also says that we know enough now. This is very well established in the scientific and medical literature. And we need to start getting information out to the public and training our healthcare practitioners. So we hope everybody will report in on this bill and reach out to your legislators and say, please pass this bill. Make a phone call or send in testimony. And we have links at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resource page for you to be able to do that.
Great.
So I won't go into it, but look, towns all over the state, all over the country. If you go here, this is Americans for Responsible Technology. There are more than 150 groups just like you all over the country fighting off these ridiculously close cell towers.
Mm-hmm.
So take inspiration from all of this. And even towns are finally speaking up on behalf of their constituents. The city of Boston has filed multiple times with the FCC. They joined other towns across the country to sue the FCC. They didn't win, but it speaks volumes that this giant town of Boston knows about this. And then Burlington, when they updated their wireless communication facility zoning, they came up with a small cell policy that said you have to be ADA compliant with this stuff. You can't just put these poles in the sidewalk where a wheelchair can't get by, which we see they do, right? It's got to blend in with the environment and be aesthetically appropriate. And Verizon's attorney said, well, some of this stuff can't be painted, so that could be a problem. And then Burlington said, listen, you can't just drop and run with this equipment like they're prone to do. If we grant approval for these applications for 7 small cells in Burlington, first of all, our preference is that they go into industrial areas and then commercial, and we want to avoid residential altogether. And they said, if we do grant approval, you, Verizon, and all the other vendors are going to have to come back every single year and recertify that the exposure limits are still within FCC compliance, and that all the cabinetry, you know, because they say it's a small cell the size of a backpack or a pizza box, but it comes with a refrigerator size box or 2 somewhere on the ground that's got to power those things with backup batteries and stuff, which are toxic. If you get a lightning strike on that and you have all these chemicals going out into the air, I mean, close range cell towers are a raw deal for so many reasons. So Burlington said you have to come back every single year and recertify every single small cell antenna, and you have to pay for an independent recertification because we don't have that expertise. So that night when they ratified this policy, the Verizon lawyer said, well, we don't want to set precedent for an annual review or having to pay for that because, mind you, they plan to put millions of these all over. So they withdrew their 7 small cell applications. So we can fight back. Every town should be learning this and fighting back because the industry knows the wheels are coming off the bus for the wireless industry. They're getting sued. And they're going fast and furious to get as much of this revenue stream in as they can before they're made to stop.
Yeah.
So our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have taken the Burlington example and they have culled best practices from all over the country. And they have an amazing toolkit that your town can hire an expert telecom attorney, because again, our local attorneys are wonderful, but they are no match for industry. You can hire attorneys who used to work for industry, have now changed teams once they realized what the playbook really was. So they know the ins and outs, backward and forward. So go to Americans for Responsible Technology to their toolkit. Other towns around Massachusetts are already doing this. Other towns all over the country and the world are doing this, okay? A moment for our schools because the proposed cell tower is going to heavily impact Rutland's elementary and middle school.
Right.
New York Times did a series of articles putting a spotlight on what Silicon Valley executives do with their children. They send them to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless. They know that a child's brain does not develop properly in the shallows of a screen. They know a child's brain develops properly with a loving, committed relationship from the adults in their life, their parents, their teachers, their peers, and the natural environment, not computers. They can have their place in the curriculum as a tool to support all those other foundational ways that a child's brain and body properly develops. In this series of articles, they go so far as to have their nannies in Silicon Valley sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. Yet they foisted that 21st century classroom upon our schools. But again, solutions for everything. The same wonderful Patty and Doug Wood, who have Grassroots Environmental Education as a nonprofit. They have that Americans for Responsible Technology program. They've also developed the Tech Safe Schools National Program, where you can reach out to them and give them the contacts in your school district, and they will send a packet of information on their legal risk exposures for radiating the kids when that fine print says don't do that. They will talk them through, and that's with world leading or national leading attorneys giving their advice on this. They will walk you through the biological effects, and of course, will always provide the solutions to remediate. And again, you will have far superior technology when you just start using your Ethernet connections again. And I ran the local education foundation for 8 years. I know as a community, we can raise the funds to get whatever accoutrements you need to hardwire the schools. It can be done. It has been done. So as I mentioned, or maybe I haven't here, but the Massachusetts Association, Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already come up with K through 12 curriculum that's free and online. And then here's that professional development webinar that Dr. McKnight and I did. So we can come in and help in a heartbeat. This little course I developed with our nonprofit and my partner in the UK, we can literally train the entire school of mature children, the staff and the faculty, literally in a half an hour of professional development. And then they'll have a certificate to show that they got the training.
That's great.
Yeah, and Environmental Health Trust that sued the FCC and has all the science on their website too. They have a whole plethora of all sorts of great signs to hang up, postcards you can get printed up, instructions for how to hardwire. So please use this. And Maryland, their state level agency of children protections of health, they are the first to recommend hardwiring the schools, and they just came out with a fact sheet that every school should be looking at.
Okay.
Okay, so lots of resources here for our schools. And again, professionally, we now have the medical conference. Here's Physicians for Safe Technology that any healthcare provider or any citizen can just go pound around and really get familiar with the science. And here's resources for all of our professionals who say you have to have heat to have harm, or the FCC says it's okay. Let's put ourselves in their shoes and look at it from their perspective, okay? And so here's lots of things we can do. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, just one by one, identify what's radiating and start hardwiring it and turning off the antennas. If that intimidates the heck out of you, you're certainly not alone. You can hire an electrician to come in and do the wiring. Your electrician may not even know about this issue, so let's educate them too, but they know how to put an Ethernet jack in the wall. That's not rocket science. And then you can hire building biologists who are highly trained professionals to come into an indoor environment and measure for mold, for VOCs, for formaldehyde, to check out your water. And they can also be certified for electromagnetic radiation specialties. And they will come in and do a report on your home, and then tell you what they recommend, and then you can take the next steps to start remediating. This film, Generation Zapped, Carolyn, I think you've had a screening in Rutland, right?
Yes, we did.
And I believe it's part of your library collection on streaming services. Usually Canopy or Hoopla offer it for free through the libraries. It's now on Amazon Prime. And even if you just wanted to watch it, you could download it or buy the DVD for, short change. But it's an excellent way to sit down with your loved ones and your friends and neighbors and the kids and their teachers and just learn together that there is something very dangerous here and we can fix it. Okay. It's nice to see this start coming mainstream on PBS. Bert Wolf has done 2 half-hour episodes that are awesome to watch. And then here's that toolkit where you can go get sample zoning code for your town. You can get a whole checklist to compare your own zoning code to. And then you can look at what real other towns have done with their language that is now in place today. So, we need to be careful, monkey see, monkey do, and we give permission to our kids if we're on our devices all the time. So excellent resources here. And then at the municipal level, the goal with radiation per the CDC is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. Right now on their website there, this applies to ionizing radiation. They used to actually have information about non-ionizing radiation precautions, and they were made to take that down. Environmental Health Trust did the Freedom of Information Act request, and they have the whole paper trail on that too. Same thing with the EPA, the CDC, all of these captured federal agencies. But it's our job in our communities to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And guess what? The law doesn't say you have to let in 5G. The law doesn't say you have to add all this capacity for them to make more money in your community. The law says within reason, you do need to be able to make an emergency call when you're on the go. It has nothing to do with being indoors. All these services they're selling you indoors has nothing to do with the law. Can you reasonably make a phone call? If you can walk around with your cell phone outside and say, I can make a phone call, you don't need to approve those cell tower antennas, right?
Right.
So this is industry wants versus public protections. So we
that's
have
an
to
important
differentiate.
point.
Yeah. So we have, great resources. This Reinventing Wires out there, you can actually for free download the PDF right online. And it tells you not only about the health risks, but a dozen other reasons why it's a raw deal for our towns to keep putting this wireless infrastructure in. It's a huge energy consumer. It is not sustainable. It has to be replaced all the time. It goes down in emergencies like we saw with Hurricane Maria, like we saw with the wildfires in California. Everything that's above ground takes forever to get back into service. Why are we investing and allowing any more of this horrible infrastructure into our communities when it's becoming obsolete? And then we're going to be stuck with it. Hardwired fiber optics to and through the premises, and then turn off the wireless. And always measure, not against the FCC's corrupted public radiation exposure limits that are being dragged through the courts right now, through the biological effects that you can see in many places through the Building Biology Institute, through Safe Living Technologies that made this meter. The information's there. We just need to know what we should be looking at. So for next steps, we cannot kid ourselves. As deep in bed as we are with the wireless conveniences in our lives, there is no safe level of man-made radiation identified in the scientific literature. There are safer levels. There's no safe level. So, you know, we just need to keep the education coming. And this is why we're doing this education session. We've done one at your public library. You've done a screening of Generation Zapped. And Carolyn, I think that on the 10th of May, you're going to have another forum at the library in Rutland where you're going to view together these amazing talks by leading experts in science and law to just teach us what we need to know and dispel this huge layer of disinformation that has been put out to our communities. And, you know, anybody can contact me. I'm happy to be brought in to speak to any board, any community group, any school. But please, we have got to protect the children, because when you damage DNA, it goes from generation to generation. And it's happening fast. So please, let's pull together, pluck up the courage to look at this, and then decide what we're going to do about it. And then start where you are. Once you've got a fair handle on this, all of our professional associations are always looking for speakers. I would be honored to be brought in to do one of these public education webinars. So start where you are, start talking it up. We have little cards that Chuck over in Framingham with the jiggity leg from his cell phone in his pocket. He's a graphic artist and he designed these cards. You can get that on our website and just get them printed out, two-sided. I always keep a stack with me because the first time you open your mouth and start talking about this, the first thing people think is tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know everything. But if you have something credible looking in hand, then now they have the option of looking to see if maybe this is what's keeping them up at night. Maybe this is their headaches or why their kids can't control themselves anymore.
Right.
So our towns, now that tech's here to stay, we need to formalize it and have a tech safety committee. We need to make sure our towns are protected from these toxic smart meters and at least insist that we have an opt-out with no fee, because otherwise they'll come in and they'll say, oh, well, National Grid offers an opt-out, but you're going to have to pay, I don't know, 30 to 80 bucks to get that toxic meter taken off and get an analog put back on. And then they're going to assess you a tariff to get that reading every month. But in the pandemic, they made it possible for people to just send in their reading. So it really needs to be looked at, but we should never be forced to have toxic technology intruding in the privacy of our homes. And we then need to start migrating away from wireless and fix all of our public buildings and our private buildings with hardwired connections, and get those bylaws updated, not with somebody like David Maxon of Isotrope. He's been all over Massachusetts. He's an industry guy. We've seen time and again, he gets in and he's nice and he seems sweet. And he says, here, I can rewrite your zoning bylaw. And he starts stripping out the protections that our towns had in there, paving the way for these small cells at close range. So watch out for the industry.
Yeah.
Hire a good attorney. For short money, Andrew Campanelli, I think he charges $8,500 to compare your state laws, your current zoning, and what legally under federal and state and local guidelines, what you can do. don't be shy about hiring an expert, because your community cannot wait for your town to get this right. The damage is happening now. Okay, so for today, I apologize. I know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose, as they said at the medical conference. But now that you know, you're halfway there. So just start taking stock. What is radiating around me, right? Start with baby steps. Do one thing. Create a sleep sanctuary tonight. And see if over the next few weeks, you might actually start noticing symptoms. Maybe make yourself jot down a little list. What's wrong with me today? Do my joints ache? Do I get headaches? Am I really wiped out? Am I not sleeping right? Are my kids off the wall? Are they losing their mind when I try and take the tablet or the cell phone away from them? We should mention this radiation itself hits the same receptors in the brains as drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, all of it, tobacco. We are biologically getting addicted. I don't know if anybody remembers the comedian Paula Poundstone.
Yeah.
Son was going into addiction rages from this technology. So it's happening. It's real. They have digital detox centers for 5-year-olds over in Asia. I mean, it's bad, you guys. So create a sleep sanctuary as best you can, and then migrate to Ethernet cables and adapters and turn off the antennas. Start choosing airplane as the rule. And you might set a timer on your device if you have to work with it. Set a timer. Pretend you're in a meeting. Pretend you're in the shower. People shouldn't have 24-hour access to you. Set a timer every half hour or so. Just go check it for messages. Keep it in airplane mode, set it away from your body, only turn on the one antenna you need. If it's just texting you're doing, just turn on that antenna. You don't need Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot, cellular, right? We just need to learn how to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And then here's a bunch of these cool resources they have. Here's a checklist if you really want to get down and dirty and fix your home. And here's what parents need to know. So very user-friendly, very easy to digest. So thank you. Our friends at New Hampshire for Safe Technology are really on this. You can reach out for them too. I'll update this set of slides, and I will put the contact information in for Carolyn Streeter and David Gold, who have been working so tirelessly in your community. And folks, none of us ever imagined this is where we'd have to give our time, and none of us want to be doing this work. But we want to be assured of safety inside our homes, outside on our private property, and in our communities. So please support these people and show up when they ask you to show up. You don't have to say anything, but you do have to show up, and you do have to vote when the vote comes, and make sure you're voting in elected officials who are going to put your needs over corporate interests. So thank you so much for your time. I'll go ahead and stop the sharing, and we'll check in with Carolyn and David to see if they have any comments or questions they would like to add before we sign off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cece. That's just spectacular information, and it's great that you're right here in Mass. So much of what you present is so local. I learn more and more every time I talk with you or watch one of your presentations. I want to say, while we're being recorded, just before I forget, I don't have a biology degree. I work in an environmental field that's biology based, and I have a science degree, but not in biology.
Okay.
Just so as not to misrepresent myself. But yeah, thank you again. And I hope that folks come to the library next Wednesday, 1 week from today, May 10th, for the screening of the expert forum, which I think is a great way to get a handle on what's going on with the whole cell tower scene. In about an hour and a half. I'm going to try to keep it nice and succinct. And then I sure hope folks come Thursday, May 18th, that's in 2 weeks, to the courtroom, Worcester Superior Court. But people can also contact me at nocelltowerrutland@gmail.com. nocelltowerrutland@gmail.com.
Okay. Yeah, and I have cleared my calendar. I plan to be there with you guys in Worcester for moral support, because If it's an empty room, that doesn't say anything to the judge. If bodies are in there, that says volumes to the judge and to the industry. Right?
Yes. We need to make a show of support there for the opposition to see in particular.
Yeah. So please, folks, I know it's a big ask. It's in the middle of a work day, a school day, but this is your community and you only get one chance at this. Once that cell tower goes up, you are going to see sickness like they've seen in Pittsfield. You are going to see your pollinators disappear, and you are going to see the fallout in your schools. So please get your mind around this quickly. We know it's a tall order, but once that cell tower goes up, Pittsfield has been fighting theirs for 3 years.
Yep, this is it. We need people in the courtroom.
All right. David, did you want to add anything today? Just unmute. There you go. Oh, I can't hear you. Am I muted on your end, or is your microphone muted? Sorry, darling, it's not coming through, but folks can find you through the same communication channels as Carolyn. And please, everybody, show up for your community, because that's where the magic happens. It's you. It's not the cavalry coming in. There is no knight in shining armor. Magic happens when the citizens learn and very diplomatically, with cool minds, become the people that the town would want to work with. And then we get to solutions. So please and thank you. All right, everybody. Good luck in Rutland. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.